groups dominated. They would have these big programs and they might have one woman just for, oh, here's a little woman that's coming to sing. And that woman knew when she grabbed that mic, she had to kill him because she was representing women in a large field of men.
Stay right here for more of our inspirational conversation with Cheryl Wills next on PBS Books. Hi, I'm Heather-Marie Montilla, and you are watching PBS Books. Thank you for joining us and welcome. As we celebrate Black history, we are excited to share content about amazing people. Today's show, our featured guest is Cheryl Wills, author of Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. We are thrilled to bring you this program as Professor Henry Louis Gates' 4-hour docuseries Gospel premieres on February 12th and 13th on PBS, pbs.org, and the PBS app. Check your local listing, of course. Gospel explores the rich history of Black spirituality through sermon and song. For over a century, gospel music has been a constant source of strength, courage, and wisdom. Let's take a moment to watch the trailer.
The Black preaching tradition is deeply connected to gospel music. Our singers preach and our preachers sing.
God, we ask that you reinvigorate somebody.
You feel it deep down in your soul. It makes you want to shout. It makes you want to sing.
That's beautiful.
Once again, Gospel premieres on PBS on February 12th and 13th. Well, now it's time to meet our featured guest, Cheryl Wills, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and author. Welcome, Cheryl.
Heather, good to see you. I'm a big fan.
Oh, well, it is so wonderful to have you here. And I am so excited about your book. Your book is amazing, and I can't wait for everyone to learn more about it.
Thank you.
So to start, can you provide an overview of your book and what inspired you to write about women in gospel music?
Sure. The book is called Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. And as someone who grew up with gospel singers on both sides of the family, I felt almost a family obligation to highlight the women especially who have really kind of fallen by the wayside. History has not been kind to them. Whenever I do interviews, Heather, people are like, who are the Davis sisters? And I'm like, these women traveled the world. They helped revolutionize gospel. And now 50 years later, it's like, and who were they? So I felt an obligation to give these women their crown back so they could be remembered as gospel continues to reach higher heights. Don't forget the pioneers. That's, I think, the resounding theme through this book.
Your book is gorgeous. It is full of facts and amazing photos. It's the perfect coffee table book. And I just a little peek of, it's amazing. Did you always have this vision for your book?
I did, Heather, because, you just showed a picture of the queen mother of all queen mothers, Mahalia Jackson. And although I was a little girl when she passed away, she is a larger than life figure, like so many of the women in this book. And Heather, as a woman, I know what they went through. They lived in a country that relegated them to a second-class citizen. So it wasn't easy for them to take the stage. It wasn't easy for them to make their voice heard, even in the church. They were supposed to be in the background, and the men were supposed to be up front. So I give extra kudos to these dynamic women for literally clawing and fighting their way to the microphone. And they have amazing legacies that deserve to be printed in this amazing books forever for people to read and know what they did. And as the popular gospel song goes, everyone needs to know how they got over.
So I want to get into the legacy and I want to get into the stories. But before we get there, what pulled me into your book was your introduction. And it was so incredibly special because in so many ways, it felt like you were sharing such an intimate story and you were going to take me by the hand and guide me to meet all of these amazing women. Can you talk about your personal connection with gospel music and the female gospel singers you included?
Absolutely. I dedicate this book to my beloved grandma, Opal Wills. She was a local gospel singer and she patterned her style after all the greats in this book, Mahalia Jackson, Albertina Walker. And I grew up sitting on the piano bench next to my grandmother. She was the first lady of a little storefront church. And she sang as if it was Carnegie Hall, Heather. Every Sunday, this incredible singer and pianist who was born in Haywood County, Tennessee, in 1927, brought the Delta, Mississippi bend of the blues to a little storefront church with my grandfather on guitar. And I tell you, it was amazing to see the power that emanated from her. As a little girl, I was mesmerized because she would sing and she would stomp that foot and people would start clapping their hands. And before you know it, she would hop off that piano and start dancing in the spirit. And it was an incredible thing to see, Heather. The power, that's when I learned the power of gospel music, how it could move you, how it could transform you. And Sister Wills, as she was called, sang for 70 years.
Wow.
And she was powerful. And she sang the songs that are all in this book, by the way. And I don't want my grandma to be forgotten. And as such, I don't want a single woman in this book to be forgotten. So that's the personal connection. My grandmother and I grew up listening to their records, all of them, every one of them. So again, I felt it a personal obligation to bring all of their stories to life.
I think that's such a beautiful story and really also goes to what a great storyteller you are because you've hooked me. And I think you've hooked everyone out there too to learn more and pick up your book. Gospel music has such a rich history. I know many people will be watching Henry Louis Gates' 4-hour docuseries this month or throughout the year. But in many ways, your book is also about women of empowerment. It's about empowering women in a place, in a space of worship. Can you discuss that a little bit? And then also how you decided to organize your book?
Sure. So you nailed it right there. Empowering women. Many of the women in this book, especially Mahalia, all of the greats that were born at the turn of the 20th century, they were born into Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. They were born being told, you can't go here, you can't go there. And worst of all, you can't protect your own body. Anyone could violate them. And what was their recourse? The courts didn't see them as full human beings. So these women had to become strong. They had to prayerfully have a family that could protect them and shield them, because they had no protection under the law. Not in the South, they didn't, and they really didn't in the North either. So when these women sang, you heard the power come from somewhere deep. My God protects me. My family protects me. I have found that inner strength, that Holy Ghost strength. And when they sang it, no one could touch them. No one could touch them. So that was really what I tapped into, that strength that they sang with. And you have so many of them. We had to somehow figure out, how do we divide, thousands of women into a book that whittled them down to 25. So I separated it into, the Queen Mothers, like Mahalia Jackson, Albertina Walker, and so forth. Then the Sisters in Song, like the Caravans and so forth, and the Clark sisters, and then she still shouts, and that's the younger women who were not born during Jim Crow, like say Yolanda Adams or CeCe Winans, who are still picking up the mantle, architects of the melody. And these are women who literally took gospel music and made it their own and just took it to another level, and were criticized for not following the tradition. But then once they became popular, they started a whole new type of gospel singing. So it was hard, I must admit, to whittle thousands of women down to 25 women. But I think when people read the book, I haven't gotten blasted yet by anyone saying, how dare you leave out this person? I mean, obviously we couldn't do everyone, but I think I got the top 5 in each category. And I'm just so glad that their legacies will now live on in the published book.
So you've discussed some of the artists already, and I was familiar with some of the artists, but I'm not sure how many people know all of these artists or even recognize that they might have fallen into one of these categories. Many were new to me.
Yeah.
So for each section, what I was hoping we could do is show an image, and talk a little bit about the artist and why they're important and why you chose to include them. And for Queen Mothers, I obviously had to choose Mahalia Jackson because I love the image.
And this image is Mahalia Jackson singing at the 1963 March on Washington. If you look closely down toward the right in the front, there is Martin Luther King, and they were friends. And Mahalia Jackson is in a class by herself. That's why she's the first woman mentioned, and she's number 1. And in gospel music, there are a lot of women who call themselves the queen of gospel. But let me tell you, Heather, this is the Queen Mother for a number of reasons. She was born in New Orleans, and again, during segregation. Her mother died when she was young. She started out a fish and bread singer. Do you know what that is? You're singing to people with low incomes who don't have any money to give you. There is no ticket to get in. Just give her some fish and bread. So she was a fish and bread singer, as it was known then. And she was known as the little girl with the big voice, right? And she's a motherless child. Her father, she didn't really know him. Her parents weren't married. And, her relatives would sort of protect her the best way they could. They're all living in abject poverty. And she found her voice through the church. And as she nurtured that voice and sang, she saw the mesmerizing power it had on people who would pass out when she sang. She's a little girl and grown people are passing out, speaking in other tongues. And as she grew older, she matured and realized, this is a business. I need to put this on wax. Her first big hit was Move On Up a Little Higher. And that was it. Mahalia Jackson was now on tour with the biggest man in gospel music, Thomas Dorsey, and the rest, as they say, is history. But let me tell you why she really stands out as far as I'm concerned. She took a stand for civil rights. Now, in 2024, it's easy to say, oh, yes, speak out and stand up for your rights. In 1944, you had to think twice because you could be executed, you could be killed, you could be targeted, especially if you were a woman. So for Mahalia to say, that's right, and this segregation is wrong, treating me, the granddaughter of slaves, as a lower than individual because I'm a Black woman. That's wrong. I'm speaking out against it. I'm going to lend my voice to this movement. Martin Luther King, you have my full support. That wasn't an easy thing to do. That was not, and you could get yourself blacklisted in certain circles by speaking up. So the fact that she embraced the civil rights movement, she would sing for free at Martin Luther King's events. Regrettably, she also sang at his funeral, which broke her heart. But Mahalia, and the other thing that really stands out about her is that she never sold her soul. She never sang pop music, and they threw all kinds of money at her, Heather. Millions and millions of dollars. Mahalia, you're the greatest gospel singer in the world. Why don't you sing the blues? You'd be the best blues singer. She was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Conviction. And
It also, I'm sorry.
That was a big reason why so many people in the church respected her, because she didn't sell out.
Well, and it also seemed like she was a mentor for others as well, which also basically made this almost like a family tree of people, because she not only never sold out, but she also mentored and shared her gift with so many.
Absolutely. I don't know if she was formerly the godmother to Aretha, but when Aretha Franklin's mother died in Detroit, Mahalia Jackson was in the Franklin household, helping to raise Aretha and her siblings. And Aretha had a front row seat to all the greats. Aretha, of course, started out as a gospel singer. She's in this book as a crossover queen. But her father, C.L. Franklin, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, had the biggest church in Black America. Okay, New Bethel Church. Every major gospel singer, including Mahalia and on down, they all came through this church to perform, to, be seen by the biggest preacher in Black America. So Aretha, how could she not become a gospel singer with that kind of influence? The Soul Stirrers were in that church. Clara Ward came to that church. Mahalia was in her home. She sat with Mahalia on the piano like I sat with my grandmother on the piano. And so when Aretha opened her mouth to sing, she learned from the best. And it's little wonder that Aretha became one of the most prolific gospel artists of all time. There she is at the Lincoln Memorial during the inauguration of President Clinton in 1993. And Aretha's voice, she tapped into the power of her beloved Mahalia Jackson. So Aretha is in a class by herself, gone too soon, but her Amazing Grace album still stands as one of the best gospel albums, if not the best of all time.
Well, and I just want to point out that both Mahalia's image that we shared and Aretha's image are both at the Lincoln Memorial. And I think it's super important to realize the important role that both played in our country. Also, as we approach the 250th anniversary of our country, we're always thinking about those true Americans whose stories maybe are under-recognized or under-thought about enough. And both of them exemplify these extraordinary women who really stand out and will continue to think about how they help shape our country.
Absolutely. They were freedom fighters, Heather, as far as I'm concerned, both of them. Again, when you were born during segregation, those horrific signs, colored only. My family, my father saw those signs. And they're telling you, you're less than. The government is sanctioning it. You're less than. Don't even think about sitting in the front of the bus, sitting at a restaurant counter. Don't even think about it. So when you grab the mic to sing, you are literally protesting against the vicious evils that suppress you. You're protesting against people who are telling you to get back because you're a woman. So that's the power you hear come through these dynamic women, all of them in this book.
Yeah, that message certainly comes through by hearing and learning about all of these tremendous stories. And I think I don't think everyone thinks about how recently those signs were present,
Thank
because
you.
they were present in the 70s, folks. you know, um,
Absolutely.
and I think it's important for people to realize that while this book, gospel music, mostly we think about, as I learned, it's really the 20th century is when it started, but to think about really all of those barriers. So let's talk a little bit about research and how you went about researching and gathering those stories. I know some of it seemed like it was passed to you, right? You grew up with it, you learned it, but these images, I mean, you did your homework. There are lots of images for many different places. And how did you go about gathering the images and then thinking about the stories to go along with them?
Absolutely. Well, a lot of the research was done when I was a little girl, because when these amazing uh, performers would put out albums, there was like essays on the back. And as a little girl, I would read, the back of, say, Shirley Caesar's album, especially with the Caravans. We loved those albums. And I learned about a lot of them from reading the back of their album covers. But of course, when I started to compile the book, I did my due diligence, reading a lot of books. There weren't many. That's the thing. There were not many books about them, but I read a lot about the era and the times they lived in and their affiliation with other gospel greats like Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers, the Blind Boys, Thomas Dorsey, who is the father of gospel music, James Cleveland, and so forth. And then I had to reach out to people who actually knew them. And that was hard. That was really hard, Heather. It was difficult to find people alive today, to especially find people who, actually knew them. And in some cases, I lucked up, like Dionne Warwick. I did an interview with her. She was so happy to talk about the Drinkard Singers.
Mm-hmm.
It was made up of her family from New Jersey. Now, of course, Dionne Warwick is related to Sissy Houston, who was Whitney Houston's mom. They had their own gospel group and they fed into Whitney and Dionne. And, here, who they are. So, I lucked up sometimes, and other times the trail ran cold. But no matter what, I was determined through research, through interviews, and finding other documents to gather as much information as possible to create a narrative about these women.
So I noticed the chapter Sisters of Song in Song, right? The section Sisters in Song. For me, it was extraordinary to really realize how many, and you've alluded to it as well, how many groups of sisters were singing in church and then singing together and really participating in gospel music in a way. And one of the things I don't know if we fully covered for people who understand the dynamics of music is you underscore how women were pushed to the back. One of the few places they could be in the front of the church is if they were singing in the choir. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe even talk about the Clark sisters at some point?
Absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head. I know in my church that I grew up in, women were not allowed to preach. They were not allowed to be in the pulpit unless they cleaned it. Literally, my grandmother, the only time she went into the pulpit was when she cleaned it for my grandfather to preach. So these women were instantly relegated, even in the church, to second-class status. Like, God called men to preach, not women. And that's not all churches, but that was the church I grew up in. And so, the way they could finally release that pain of being told you're less than was by grabbing a mic and singing a song. And many of these women, especially when the sisters would sing, that was their way of condemning this sexist mindset that, oh, women can't do that. Well, my grandmother and many of the women in this book, they would testify before they sang. A testimony was basically a little sermon. You're just not in the pulpit. You're standing, my grandmother would stand at the piano and give her little sermon, which was called a testimony. And that was her way of saying, I have something to say about the goodness of God too. Don't think that because I wear a bra that my voice doesn't matter. So they took their power in little ways that became huge for those who listened, because people would stand up and shout when my grandmother gave her little testimony. So talking about sisters of song, let's talk about the Clark sisters, right? These young, phenomenal ladies helped redefine gospel music in their own way. Their mother was the great Maddie Clark. There is a movie about these phenomenal sisters. And the Clark sisters, their signature song, You Brought the Sunshine, helped revolutionize gospel singing. It took it into a whole new dimension. And there are many sisters who would get together, like the Davis sisters. I'm sure you never heard of them, right? They were of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And these were women known for singing hard gospel. That's like the church I grew up in. They didn't wear makeup. They were very humble. They wore all black. But when they grabbed that mic, woo! When they grabbed the mic, Heather, there was no going back. Like they would tear the roof off the church. So, it's so beautiful when siblings, especially the girls, all get together and blend their voices. It's a different synergy, Heather, because they grew up very often sleeping in the same bedroom together, right? Eating breakfast together, going to school together. And so when they brought that similar energy together to sing to the glory of God, it was just an amazing sound. And the Clark sisters are an example of that.
Well, thank you. I just want to reset the conversation for those people who are just joining us. I am here with Cheryl Wills, author of Isn't Her Grace Amazing? The Women Who Changed Gospel Music. Thanks for joining us, and back to the conversation. Okay, so we also, and you alluded to it a little bit, we were talking about women and sisters and being able to preach. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about Pastor Shirley Caesar, who is part of your section, The Architects of Melody. Can you speak a little bit about her role in singing gospel music and also in her ministry?
Absolutely. When Pastor Shirley Caesar started, she knew women were not supposed to preach. But today, she's a pastor in North Carolina, and she's a beloved pastor, and she is phenomenal. But when she started out, she dropped out of school to join the biggest all-women gospel group in the country, Albertina Walker and the Caravans. Albertina Walker is considered right up there with Mahalia Jackson. She's not Mahalia, but she's almost there. People literally call her the Queen of Gospel as well. But Albertina Walker had one of the biggest, best groups out there. And Shirley Caesar, when she started singing as, again, a little girl, just like all the greats, notice the similarity. Mahalia Jackson started singing as a little girl. Aretha, they all start singing in church, and everyone's like, wow, you're amazing. So did Shirley Caesar. And she approached Albertina Walker and said, this is the group I want to sing with. You guys are the best. And Albertina heard her sing a solo, and she was like, yeah, you come on in. She was still a teenager. Shirley Caesar is one of the most powerful, electrifying, dynamic singers out there. I'm so glad she's still with us because her voice is second to none. One of their biggest hits was Sweeping Through the City. That's a song my family would often sing based off the record. And she stayed with the Caravans for about 8 or 9 years. And then she went solo. And again, she would give a testimony. That's what the caravans were also known for. They would do a little sermon. They called it a testimony, but it was really a little mini sermon on the record. And then they would go off and sing the song. And it was just, I mean, there's a song called The Denied Mother by Dorothy Norwood, which is one of my family's favorites. Dorothy Norwood talked in her testimony on the record about how her daughter was ashamed of her because she got burns and scars on her face. And she says in a live recording, the reason I got these burns and scars on my face is because when you were a little girl, the house was on fire and I ran in to get you. And now all these years later, you walk right by me. And then she said, but that's all right. And the church explodes, you know? So that's an example of how women would give their own little sermonettes before they sang. There's nothing like this music in the world, Heather.
Well, and it's also interesting because many of the artists you highlighted traveled to Europe too and shared this bit of America
Absolutely
in the whole world. And I think that's also, as we think about the important role of these artists in telling our country's stories, it's also important to realize the world was seeing that as very much part of the culture within the United States. And I also think that's special. So let's talk about the industry, because I feel like the gospel music industry has evolved.
Yes.
And one of the things that was really surprising to me was actually the guitar. Yeah. So I had no idea that women weren't allowed to play the guitar, that was a man's instrument. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And one of my favorite people in the book to profile, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Oh, so, yes. And this is consistent in American society, right? Women do this, men do that. I mean, that was across the board from this country's inception. Women cook, men do the work. And now, fortunately, we are living in a time where we're breaking down all of those gender assigned roles, but they were hard and fast in the 20th century. And when it came to music, women could play the piano, but men played the guitar or the trumpet. And then you have this dynamic young woman, Rosetta Tharpe, who said, well, I want to play the guitar. Well, why can't I? Not only did she play the guitar, she played it better than most people, and she created her own riffs. And you know what, Heather? Those riffs that she just from Cotton Plant, Arkansas is where Rosetta Tharpe was from. Again, born in the thick of segregation. And she started tinkering around and creating her own sound. And guess who heard it? Elvis heard it. Johnny Cash heard it. And they were like, whoa, 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 whoa. And they took it, and they admittedly so. I'm not telling anything that's not true. She influenced rock and roll, and she is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She was inducted posthumously as an influencer, but she is there nonetheless, and rightly so. She created those licks that would change American music forever. So women started to break out of those roles, and Rosetta Tharpe, who is featured prominently in this book, truly led the way. But other women started to say, hey, I want to do this too. Gospel was a man's game, Heather. Gospel was a man's game. The Blind Boys, the Soul Stirrers, I could go on and on. Male groups dominated. They would have these big programs, and they might have one woman just for, oh, here's a little woman that's coming to sing. And that woman knew when she grabbed that mic, she had to kill them because she was representing women in a large field of men. So that's another reason why these women, when they sang, they had something to prove. They said, my voice matters. So when Mahalia grabbed the mic, or Albertina Walker, or Shirley Caesar, or any of them, they knew, I have something to prove here. And I want to get back to what you also said about traveling. Clara Ward, another big gospel singer who also was a mentor to Aretha Franklin. Clara Ward and the Ward singers traveled the world. There is an image of the book with them with their suitcases, traveling, getting on a plane. And you know what one of their most famous songs was? Packing up, getting ready to go, because they were always traveling all over the world. People loved them. And they would not only be dressed to the nines, but they would do their little Holy Ghost steps while they were singing. The world ate it up. They hit continents everywhere. So imagine all of these women, these pioneers, traveling the world, influencing music, and when they die, their legacy dies with them. I find that unacceptable. Heather, that's unacceptable.
It
So
is, but that is why you're here, so we can share your book and let people know. Well, one of the other artists you included, and it was in the section "And Still She Shouts," is Yolanda Adams. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit. I'm sure Yolanda Adams is familiar to people out there, but I was hoping you could share about why she is so extraordinary in her work.
there she is, and she's a dynamic woman as well. Born in 1962 in Houston, Texas, Yolanda Adams, well, actually, she is 62, and she took gospel to the next level. She is one of the greats of all time. She has sold more than well over 10 million albums. She is the first gospel artist to win an American Music Award. She's known as the queen of contemporary gospel. My favorite song by her is Mountain High, Valley Low. So many people love that song. But, she also has a morning show. She's performed at the White House. Yolanda Adams, this is my opinion, is our modern day Mahalia. Powerful voice, living in our digital society. She is everywhere. I've collaborated with her on several events like the Essence Music Festival, and she is a phenomenal woman and an inspiration as well.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about music. So I really, as I read your book, the one thing I desired was a playlist or a companion CD, because I wanted to listen and read at the same time. And so I have a question, which is where do you recommend people hear these artists, or is there a place they can go?
Yeah, we have a Spotify list, and go onto HarperCollins website, and then my website is CherylWills.com. And, I wish there was, that's a tall order to create the music to go with the book because of all the licenses and so forth. But we do have a Spotify list, and it's on HarperCollins.com. And, so many of these songs are the foundation of American music. They're the foundation. And you have this big PBS special coming up with Henry Louis Gates called Gospel. Therein lies the roots of the blues, rock and roll, reggae, you name it. It all started with spirituals. And gospel music is such a beautiful evolution of how this music came to be. There was a time where it started with pianos, and that was it. Thomas Dorsey, the father of gospel music, he was a blues singer, and he turned his life around. And people said, you don't bring that kind of piano playing into the church. Get out. And he was like, but this is music. This is our music. And so he was the one that brought the rhythm that you see in the church, that you're going to see in Henry Louis Gates' special. Thomas Dorsey started that. And then they added the guitar, and then they added the organ, and then the tambourine, and then the trumpet. And before you know it, there was this beautiful mosaic that was taking place in churches all over the country. And the foot stomping and the shouting and the sweating and the souls being saved and transformed. I mean, that is what America is today. She has to thank the gospel pioneers for her music that's transformed the world. And it's been a privilege and an honor to document this in honor of my grandma, Sister Opal Wills. And she died in 2019. I bring her back to life right along with Mahalia, right along with Dorothy Love Coates, right along with Marianne Williams and all the greats who no one talks about them much anymore, but they should be talked about because each and every one left a mark in this world.
Well, I think your book will inspire people to talk about these amazing women. I need to thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, for sharing your knowledge, your insights, your research process, your personal stories, but really sharing these fabulous women who have really changed gospel music and changed America. So thank you so very much for that.
Heather, it was a pleasure, and keep up the great work. I'm a big fan of PBS Books, PBS Docs, everything PBS. So you guys are doing great work.
No, thank you so much. We also want to thank you for watching this program. Don't forget to like or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Interested in becoming more involved in the PBS Books community? Join our PBS Books Readers Club group on Facebook and sign up for our e-newsletter at pbsbooks.org/subscribe. Plus, check out our upcoming episode on the PBS Books Readers Club with Henry Louis Gates Jr. as we talk with him about his recent books and upcoming programs. Visit the PBS Books Readers Club on Facebook and you can submit your questions for Professor Gates, and he might even answer one of your questions live. As you explore gospel, consider listening to the music of some of these extraordinary female gospel singers. Well, until next time, I'm Heather-Marie Montilla, and happy reading.